Hello and welcome back to another episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. My name is Lishan Huang, Co-Executive Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This season on the show, we are exploring the theme of design and performance, looking at the different nuances and meanings of that intersection. And now for my co-host.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Donatello, Design Competitions and Event Manager at AIGA.
And our guest for this episode is Helder Santo, based in New York City. He's a partner at Unnamed. Helder, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Let's just get into things. You've worked across a variety of creative agencies and later co-founded your own business. So we'd love to learn more about you and your career journey so far, maybe some of the highlights, and then we'll learn more about you over the course of this conversation.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share my story, and it's very nice to meet both of you. I started a big part of my career was starting at Digitas, which at the time was really focused on digital marketing and design, standard websites. And this is all before, this is like early 2000s. So it's before smartphones came out, all those things. And what I love about that moment in my career, looking back on it now, is no one really knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's like the beginning of the internet, essentially, right? And brands really embracing what it means to sort of have this presence online. And looking back on that, the decisions we would make and the sort of the appetite for experimentation and doing new things was huge. And we were lucky enough at that time to partner with several brands that matched that appetite that we had. In fact, one of my highlights there that I always love talking about is we did, sounds kind of silly to talk about it now because it's so standard, especially given this format, but we did like a live webcast uh, for uh, for this in-person event, which had like celebrity entrepreneurs, and there was like, probably like 3,000 people in the audience, and then we had like tens of thousands watching the webcast online. And for me, we came up with that idea to do it, but then it was also like, what kind of value can we be adding in that moment? Webcast, so it doesn't just feel like you're watching a show on TV. Like, how do you start adding more moments of interaction?
Totally.
So we started having things like, people submitting questions online. We enabled people to chat with each other online. And it sounds pretty standard now, but this is all before, like almost like 6 months before YouTube launched.
Wow.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So way
Yeah.
So
before Twitch and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so it's but it was just like, and that's always been my instinct is in sort of experimenting with emerging media and figuring out how are we going to sort of maximize these things and not just try and duplicate what exists somewhere else. That was like a big moment for me. I mean, we did. I remember staying up at 4 o'clock in the morning the night before, pushing that thing live and getting that sense of adrenaline. From Digitas, I went to McGarry Bowen, which then was widely known as a traditional agency. They're great. They were, well, the first year I was there, they were Ad Age and Ad Week Agency of the Year. And they brought me on to sort of help build out their digital practice. And it was interesting. Like, I remember sitting in a room with who was then the chief digital officer, and my account title was like, account managing director of digital or whatever it was. And I remember saying in that room, I said, well, hopefully we don't need to have like these sort of descriptors after our names after a while because everything is kind of digital. And again, like this is back when
Totally.
people first,
Totally.
we, we,
Where digital in your job title was like, ooh, this is distinguishing you in some way, right? Not like
yeah,
the default.
and all it did was, I guess I kind of understood the intent behind that because when new technology is emerging, you need to sort of like identify the real experts in those fields. But it also felt like at the same time it kind of like imposed this kind of like artificial silos, and it
Totally.
created more it created more sort of territory discussions and roles and responsibility discussions that maybe was necessary. But there, one of the coolest things that happened for me was I came up with an idea that leveraged this is like maybe 2010, that leveraged sort of like Facebook's data, um, and use that data to create custom experiences on this bank's site that we used to work with. And the highlight for me there was specifically because the clients actually added my name as an inventor on a patent application,
Mhm.
and which for me was super cool because clients don't have to do that. For they don't have to list the inventors from the agency.
Mhm.
But that's when I started that just like reinforced my kind of self-guiding mission of like experimenting with emerging media. And then from there, I went to RGA, and that's when I got like a master class in what it means to have like a design-led company. I learned so much there, and honestly, I felt like I just hopped onto like a rocket ship. I grew this piece of business, which started from like 5 people to 200 plus in the span of five
Wow.
years. And we were doing everything. We were doing big campaigns. We were doing product development for a technology company, product concepting. I would get flown out to Korea. I won't name the company, but it's going to seem kind of obvious in a little bit.
Yeah.
A big Korean tech company, and I would go out there and, I would meet with their product teams and their researchers, and we would share kind of, exciting ideas and prototypes. That just kind of like really brought everything together. And then from there, I went to Wonderman Thompson. That was my first like big holding company job. It was owned by WPP. And the thing I learned a lot there as well. I was there for about 5 years. But the thing that I really appreciated about that experience was looking back at my previous roles at Digitas, McGarry Bowen, and RGA. They all have an incredibly strong culture. When I was at Digitas was private. Then it went public on its own. And then as I was leaving, it got bought by Publicis. That's just to give you the context of like you felt like you were working in a company that had a clear vision and a clear culture. Gary Bowen, Gordon Bowen, and John McGarry were still walking the halls. So strong founder-led culture. And then obviously at our GA, we had Bob Greenberg, who is a legend in his own right. And I kind of started feeling the absence of that when I went to like a bigger holding company
Mhm.
model. And that's when I really decided after 5 years there, I wanted to sort of go back to a more nimble kind of structure, and I decided to just start my own thing before I eventually joined Unnamed.
Wow. What a journey. It's so
Yeah,
it's
and
so
it's
interesting to see like how things that were used it was so innovative back then before YouTube
yeah,
even. Wow.
yeah, yeah, it was cool. Yeah, I mean it's 20 plus years of messing around, so it's been there's a lot. You do a lot of good damage in that time.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So you started mentioning that you're now a partner at Unnamed,
Yeah.
and in your website, you categorize yourself as a regenerative design ecosystem. Can you elaborate a little bit of what that means?
Yeah, sure. The generative design ecosystem, that's really just a way of saying that it's all about creating momentum with the clients that we collaborate with. They come to us with a brief, we knock out the brief, but then we really embrace those relationships and those partnerships, and oftentimes wind up connecting them to other people that we've collaborated in the past or currently collaborating with. And so when we talk about regenerative design ecosystem, it's something that our goal is to always create like this ecosystem that's like sort of like self-generating or regenerating, and ensuring that the clients that we collaborate with are getting like an exponential impact from working with us. Right. So it's not just about knocking out the brief. It's also about thinking about their business and connecting them to people within our network. And that becomes incredibly helpful, particularly for the venture side of the business, where a lot of these companies are starting up, and networking and meeting the right people could literally be the difference between your business surviving and not.
Mhm.
Right. Talent is still the most important thing out there, regardless of what industry you're in. So, and that's what we mean by that. We want to think of ourselves as more than just, a design studio. We really want to position ourselves as true partners that are willing to go the extra step to deliver that exponential impact.
Awesome. Very cool. So speaking of venture building, I wanted to hear more from you. Your understanding of venture building in the context of creative strategies agencies. So, what are the
Yeah.
unique challenges that you might encounter in this context, and like merging entrepreneurship with design, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, so our ventures program is really exciting, and I like to talk about it in several different ways. So one thing is we are intentionally designing a portfolio of collaborators, clients that we feel give us the right balance of work to keep us sharp, right? And the interesting thing is we work with both like global established brands and then startups that are trying to become those things. Um, and what we found is that client like prospects that we talk to, they love the idea that we have the rigor to get past and through a big system for like a top 10 Fortune company, Fortune 100 company, whatever it is. And then the more established brands love that we're working with startups because that's where a lot of the innovation happens, right? So having like that portfolio of clients allows us to sort of like continue to hone our craft, but then also it creates more opportunities to experiment with these venture startups because a lot of them are starting businesses or they're starting industries, right? So that's like a completely different mindset than trying to sell another smartphone or whatever it may be. I think this is about where they're trying to carve out a space in the world that's not just for their company, but they have a vision of how an industry should change or a net new industry. And that just really kind of forces you to think about how to simplify what they're trying to do, right? Because a lot of these founders have huge ambitions, but you kind of have to like walk the market to the line so they understand like what's happening and what's so disruptive about that change. So we love that component. So that's at a high level, it's an intentional portfolio mix that keeps us sharp, keeps us on the cutting edge. And then the second component of that is I think as a design led company, for far too long, like the value that we deliver to businesses has been undervalued.
Mhm.
They take for granted great product design. They take for granted brand identity systems. And I think the ventures component is a way of us trying to recapture that value that we generate for these businesses. Because a lot of us have touched businesses that wound up becoming unicorns. And when you look at the fee that we would capture associated with the growth that we help generate for those companies when they become billion-dollar plus companies, it kind of hurts a little bit because you feel like you had such a huge role in building and helping to build and create this brand in a way that helps drive that growth. So we have one very simple principle when, especially with ventures, is one, we never do any work for free.
Mhm.
There's never like a straight up equity deal. What we often do is we find a cash and equity deals because then we feel like we're standing on our principle, that we need to have some cash in the door to keep the business going and to show that there's a mutual sense of respect. And then the equity, that's a beautiful tool that we can implement because then we're now investors in our client's business.
Mhm.
So their success would mean a lot to us considering we have a stake in that company.
Right. There's like that aligned incentives with that stake, right?
Exactly. And that's early. The smarter companies, I think, want people that are going to go along for the ride. And I think it's just like it's a magic. Like working with founders is probably one of my favorite things. Also the toughest, not gonna lie. But working with founders, you kind of live it. You find yourself. I say it all the time. I'm guilty of falling in love with my clients' businesses. I'm a nerd in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, and you get like sucked into their world, and you start seeing the world how they see it, and it could be very different from your starting point. And they just have like a passion. They talk about their businesses like they talk about their kids. You know, so yeah, it does a lot for just to try and recap all of that. Like it does a lot to keep us sharp, balancing the portfolio. It's a way of recapturing the value that the design community delivers to these businesses. And then the third thing is just the relationships you build with founders, and you get a glimpse into how they think about things is fascinating to me.
Totally. Yeah, on that point of falling in love with your clients' companies, their startups, it really does extend to this metaphor of dating. I think this matching between like
Yeah,
an agency, a studio with a client, right? It's like not every agency is for every client and vice versa in that sense and finding that out. So you've shared a bit about your approach to things in terms of like culture, alignment with your clients. There's one more thread that I wanted to explore in your background and expertise, and then we'll kind of loop back to the main theme of the podcast, which is design and performance. But first, just part of your background. Prior to joining Unnamed as a partner, you had founded a company. Is it Ida X or Ada X?
Ada X. Yeah.
Ada X, right? So it was an experience design company that later merged with Unnamed. You were creating the next generation of experiences using generative AI. Love to
Yeah.
get your thoughts on the evolution of AI, which is like, by the time this comes out, there'll probably be some new thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, what have you seen so far? Where do you think it's headed, and how do designers stay relevant in that space that is changing so quickly?
That's a loaded question. I was look. I'm like I said. I'm a total nerd when it
Hmm.
comes to this stuff, and I literally lose sleep over just nonstop thinking. Not anxiety or anything like that. I get excited about ideas and opportunities. And I had that moment a few years ago when ChatGPT had that big launch. It's really what set the whole world on fire, right? When it comes to Gen AI. No, but you just have like there's a few moments in our lives where we have like this oh shit moment. Like it just hits you like a ton of bricks, and you just know that nothing is going to be the same after this. And that was when I had that moment. I looked back on my career, and what I realized is that these moments when new technology comes out that's so profound, these are huge growth opportunities for the creative industry. So when I look back at my career, talked with like there was like three big waves, right? There's internet, mobile, and social. Each of those waves uh, played a huge role. And if you look at revenue for all the studios and agencies, creative services industries, revenue was going through the roof at that point. And that was for two reasons. One is the brands that knew they needed to take advantage of these spaces either A, didn't have the skill set in house, or B, didn't have the capacity to take advantage of it. And going back to my earlier point is like when these things start, everyone is a novice. Everyone is learning at the same time.
Yeah.
And I had the benefit of that experience, not being intimidated by something like Gen AI. Instead, I just embraced it with my lens of how I think about brands and how I think about customers and brands should interact with one another. So I use that from like a business model perspective. Like this could be a big growth opportunity for the industry. Now, the interesting thing here is that AI, the big chatter that happened at this moment was, oh my God, a robot can write well, and now machines are starting to make pretty pictures and videos. We're all going to be out of jobs soon. And I took the exact opposite approach. I'm like, you have to embrace this. This is a new tool that we need to use. And how can we use it to change how brands and customers interact with one another? Whereas even now, like the majority of the use cases for Gen AI tend to be what I refer to as like kind of like back office activities. So if you're working in a studio or an agency and you're a strategist, you're using it to do research and get to sharper briefs faster. If you're a logistics company, you're using it to manage your supply chain. But everyone was avoiding, I think, because of the I think because of the sort of the newness of it and the sort of the how quickly it can go, the perception of how AI can go off the rails and get unscripted and start hallucinating, like
Totally.
hallucinations that we see within Gen AI. Like the brands understandably were hesitant, but over the year or two that we started experimenting, we started developing models that helped mitigate a lot of these things and started adding value pretty quickly to the experience. So that was sort of the meaning behind kind of that's why I started the business from like a business opportunity perspective. And then I wound up merging with Unnamed because, Virgilio and Manny, I know them. I worked with them at RGA years ago, and they are quite honestly, the top 0.1% of design talent. Um, I have no doubt that we should properly join forces.
Like just giving us the background and the story, and
Yeah,
like we like to kind of connect all the threads of like where are you coming from, right? Like what is your creative
yeah,
lineage? What are the things that you're thinking of? And I think what you were talking about reminds me of like I think it was some viral post or meme going around within design Twitter or design threads at that point around Gen AI, and someone saying like, yeah, Gen AI will completely replace creatives when clients know exactly what they want, right? And then
yeah,
there's still this kind of like relational layer between like, the business goals of a client, whether they're a startup or a mega corporation, and then what the creative executions are, all of the touch points in an experience, right? And that's something that is human relationships, human experiences. That's not something replicable by something that can spit out text or images faster.
yeah. And I think just to build on that point, like I feel like the analogy, the example I always give is if you put a talented designer in front of Midjourney, and you have a complete non-designer in front of Midjourney, and you ask them to make something, the output from the designer is going to have and a much higher fidelity and a much higher sharpness because he or she just simply knows what to prompt, knows the
Totally. Yeah,
vernacular, knows the
yeah.
language, whereas, and I think people miss that. It's like, it's magical in a lot of ways. And then there's also like the kind of more subjective layer around just taste, like you
Totally.
can't, yeah, it's pretty, so I always talk about in that context is like, that's why embracing these tools, regardless of your craft is a must if you want to continue to progress in your career. We're not going to be able to put that back in its box. It's out.
That's great. I'm not surprised that you mentioned that you're not afraid of AI and you have embraced it so easily because you seem to be a visionary, working on things before they become live. It's impressive. So very, very interesting, very inspiring to hear some optimistic point of view on AI because I think I've been listening more the pessimists. So it's good to have this balance.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's a. I mean, if you look back at every kind of major revolution, there's a concern about always been a concern about jobs. This is very different, right? This is like game world changing technology. A lot of people compare it to. I talk about internet, mobile, and social as like previous sort of waves. It just as like more of like a marketing brand design lens. But like when you talk to people in the AI industry, and we work at a few startups now, the analogy they make is this is like electricity. This is like when electricity was first launched, introduced to the world. That's how significant of a change it's going to be. But I'm a believer in when good people use amazing tools, good things come out of it. So the good people have to outdo the bad actors. Is kind of like the way I think about it. But anyway.
Yeah, that's a good take. So, as Lishan mentioned, we are currently working on design and performance as the topic of the year. And you have brought many examples of breakthrough innovation projects that you've been involved. And oftentimes when we're working with innovative projects, we need to innovate from inside out. So within our teams and to our clients and products and services. So what are ways in which you have built new ways of working or innovative rituals or routines with your team and how they have performed? And if you have any example with AI-based tools, that would be great also to hear
Well,
some
it's
examples.
yeah, that's a very active conversation we have happening right now with Unnamed. We're about to launch like a new way of organizing ourselves internally. And it really comes, I think it all centers around our belief in not having layers, um, and not having layers and having senior hands-on work. Like when you meet us, you're meeting the team right away. There's no I'm going to go find like 20 other people to do this work, and I'm going to like we take that very very seriously. And the challenge with that right now is like we're roughly like 15 full-time folks, and probably can go up to like 30 or so with like when we augment our support with specific skill sets. But I think the challenge in that model, like no layers, senior hands-on work, is that you kind of by default have to spread out the work a little bit. So like, we always have at least have a partner driving the project, but each of us as a partner has our own unique perspective and has our own unique craft that we bring to the table. And what we started realizing is that there's so many moments where I could benefit from having like Anders, who's one of our partners, or Virgilio involved in this project. And instead of just wishing and hoping that it's going to happen organically, we created like a really simple model where we have like we call them roundtable sessions, where each discipline gets to see the brief that they come in. As they come in, we give our point of view. We see the first round strategy. We see the first round of creative work at least. And then if there's any sort of like big client or collaborator pivotal moments, that's when we would bring ourselves together. We've been doing it organically well enough, but we felt like we needed to build like a little system in place. So this way, everyone gets to impact the work, bringing their own unique perspective, and ultimately the clients benefit from that, right? Because we're making sure that everyone has seen the work. We're making sure that everyone has been able to weigh in specifically. So I'm excited to get like to formalize this in these roundtable sessions, because like even our teams, we get jealous of other people's work sometimes. Like, oh, I wish I was working on that, and oh, how can I when can I see this, and I want to like just play around with it. So, But this way, we're building it into the system, and we're kind of like feeding that curiosity, right? So that's a model that we're putting in place now, and we're really excited.
Yeah, and I think, on this topic of like a roundtable session and performance in this sense, we think about, I mean, obviously, like doing this podcast interview is a form of performance, and so is like pitching a client something, right? There's these different kinds of performances that are not necessarily just like standing up on a stage talking about your design work. So, do you have an example of something that is performance in your day-to-day life and work as a partner at Unnamed? And yeah, how do you think about that? Like how you show up as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us is the number one thing that we want to communicate as a team, and I think what clients and everyone wants to see, because this is the thing that I always remind myself of is when a client selects a partner, that's a big deal for them. A lot of times, if the decision goes really bad, that could be bad for their career,
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of times on our side, we tend to take it for granted. So I think for the first thing, especially if there's an existing relationship, I think the most important thing that we have to do is just build trust right away, trust and confidence.
It's the
That
dating
and that's
process that Lishan Nation, no?
Yeah.
100%,
Right. That you're
100%.
trustworthy, you're worthy of
Yeah.
more time and attention and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and that comes across in a lot of different ways, right? Um, so I think just from my perspective, I think our work speaks for itself. We have like a really several strong, dozens of strong case studies that represent a wide range of industries. So while we let the work talk for itself, like we need to solve that intangible thing, like the
Mhm.
trust factor. And it has to be earned. It has to be earned every step of the way. And I think that's what we try and communicate.
Very cool. Can you share the other side, like a project that probably was very chaotic that taught you more than a successful one?
Well, I think like chaos and failure, like that's where you learn. You kind of learn what not to do and what to do. I think for me, one of the first projects, and actually this was like unnamed, we developed like this really innovative experience. I won't mention the brand because we're talking about performance and things like that, but it was a simple idea. And the idea was like, how can I brief a brand on who I am? And then how can the brand reposition its products based on who I am? But not like, but there was like a lot of detail in the system. And we're only able to do it because we used Gen AI, or in this case, it was literally ChatGPT, where the user would use a very simple interface. We're talking like 5 sliders. I'm confident. I'm a nurturer. I'm artistic. I'm whatever. And depending, and we assigned a value to each of those attributes. So you can go from 0 to 10 across 5. And even that within itself, if you took those scoring system literally, it would give you something like 150,000 possible permutations in the sense of creating like a persona profile. And then from there, when you create the profile, then every product that brand offered was now rewritten in service of that profile. So when you add that layer, what you wind up getting is you get 1 million+ permutations and copy. So the interesting thing there was just imagine like a poor copywriter or marketing manager approving 1 million lines of copy. Like it would take a year just to get that done. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Like brands have to let go a little bit of these sort of prefabricated lines and assets, and have a little bit of I'm not going to use the word faith, but have a structure in a way that sort of mitigates any risk. And what we found was because we sort of controlled the input by using that slider, you actually have really good control over the output because we didn't allow the user to ask or give open-ended questions or have open-ended responses. We kind of like created the guardrails, and what came out was really interesting. And the other thing that we always focus on is how do you start pairing up like discipline leads and having them collaborate together? And the best thing that we did is we had like an engineer sitting with a copywriter. The copywriter would write the structure. The engineer would put the correct prompts in and tweak it. And then there was just like a back and forth. And I love like that when like two disciplines that probably would have never met like 3 years ago are now like the key resources, the key craft people to get this thing up and running and out the door. That worked. It did not hit its sales targets,
Mhm.
but what it did do was from start to finish, I think it was over 50% of the people completed that experience, which is super high. And then the second thing that we all believe, including the clients, is that if we we created like a standalone experience to just to get this thing up and running to learn from it. But if we integrated that type of experience into an optimized site, a site that's optimized to drive sales, for example, we have like a very high degree of confidence that it would meet that second tier of objectives, which is like driving sales for the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. I wanted to follow up on that. You were saying this project example didn't quite meet the sales targets, but it was seen as like this example, this learning experience. I'm curious if you've seen other maybe new kinds of performance metrics that have arose from this AI enabled work, right? Is that also changing the way that we measure performance of a given campaign or activation or whatever that might be, and how you think about that?
Yeah, there's an idea we're starting to experiment with now. To me, it all comes down to what's the benefit of having Gen AI as part of an experience between a brand and a customer. This could be like a product, like an app or whatever. It could be, a marketing experience. It could be customer service. It could be any of these things. And for me, the most amazing thing that happens within Gen AI is it gives you, especially when you're talking about like large language models, it gives you the context, right? It doesn't just give you answers. It gives you the context so you understand the answer, which is like what the best teachers do, right? And what that context sort of what underlies that context is really empathy. I'm not just giving you the answer. I'm trying to connect with you. And I think that is the sweet spot for creating and designing new experiences that leverage the capabilities of Gen AI. It's really to sort of help bridge the gap between a brand and a customer with empathy, showing that you understand what they're trying to achieve, showing that you understand who they are, and showing and just giving them helpful information and context as they make whatever decision they need to make when they're interacting with the brand. And the metric that we're playing around with now is something we just stole it from standard language in the psychology business, which is the emotional quotient, EQ. Right. EQ, having a high EQ is actually a really strong indicator towards someone's success in a lot of fields. And what we're trying to do is say, so Gen AI, if its superpower could be creating empathetic experiences, how can we start measuring experiences based on the perceived EQ of that brand?
Hmm.
Right. Does that brand have a high emotional quotient? Does that brand understand what kind of help I need? Does that brand understand what I'm trying to achieve as a person? And then how is that brand then regenerating itself to be more bespoke to you in a very empathetic and human way? So I think it's kind of a weird thing that, Gen AI is allowing us to be more human at scale. If you think
Totally.
that's like another silly way of thinking about it, it's like it's a tremendous opportunity. So we're
Yeah, I think that's really helpful for both agencies and brands, right? Thinking about this is like, okay, yes, there's like the bottom line, but also this is also an opportunity to think about these new metrics, right? And like, I think some of the public social media kind of stuff around AI art, where it's just like, individuals playing with it, it often is like at this very surface level of like whatever the trendy cool thing is. Whether, I mean, at the time of recording this, we just had like a week of people posting their like studio Ghibli ripoffs or those like starter kit things, right? And like these are just kind of like trends or just people experimenting, and like it can be polarizing, but I think at this deeper level for professional designers, for agencies who are doing this, it really is involving like rethinking what performance means as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Yeah, very cool. So, what are your aspirations for Unnamed for the upcoming years? Is there anything specific that you're focused or you wish that a new challenge, like what type of new challenges or new clients you might be focusing on from now on?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. It's great because we're a group of dreamers. We're in the most practical sense. So I think we get caught up in how ambitious we are sometimes, which I think is a great place to be. And there's one thing we have in the hopper that we can't quite make public yet, but that's something that we're really excited about, which hopefully is a stepping stone for us to kind of reframe how the creative services industry engages with clients and partners. Sorry, I have to be a little cryptic, but I can't really talk about it. But yeah, but that's like one ambition we have. And then, in terms of when we talk about the type of work that we do is product design, brand identity design, and then activation, right? So that could be anything from like a campaign to like whatever it may be. And I think for us, we want to keep on building relationships with our collaborators in a way that allows us to hit on all of those three markers of deliverables. Um, you know, because I think that's when we feel most excited about the work that we're doing, and I think that's when the clients are getting that exponential impact from our relationship. I think that in terms of the work that's getting us really excited lately is really the connection between like hardware and software, and kind of like figuring out, especially from like a product design perspective, how these two worlds. Where we're working with a venture company right now that's not quite launched, but they have a hardware software play. It's a wearable and a app companion, let's say. We just got the identity approved, so the brand identity, and we parallel path doing the brand identity and the product development and design so that everything feels like it's coming from one system, and even like the little micro interactions you get with an experience feels like it's different. It's being defined by brand. We often say like brand is interface, and it's working in an entirely new space. It's like a first of its kind tech product. And this goes back to actually, I think Julia, you asked around the regenerative design ecosystem. We got to a point where the ideas that we were coming up with was completely changing the brief. It had significant influence on the product design, which is great. Like I don't know one agency or one studio that doesn't want to be in that position.
Yeah,
Mhm.
being able to like
Yeah.
redefine your brief is like, yeah, such a
Yeah.
gold standard of being able to get to, right? Otherwise, you're just implementing somebody else's ideas.
Exactly. So we started asking the question because they're a startup and they're well funded and they're gonna have a very successful venture. We started asking the question like, do you guys have the right like technology skill set in house to bring this thing to life and the way it should be? And they said no. No. Why do you know anybody? Well, yep, we sure do. And it's not. And we're not trying to say this is like a he's not like a named employee that's we're not trying to create a facade. We just bring him in as a collaborator, and he's part of our. He's now part that we're now all part of this like design ecosystem, right? We did something that we think is going to make the product much better, and we brought the right technology resources to iron out the framework to be able to create this experience in a fluid way as possible. So I think that's a way where going back to like all these things are starting to merge, right?
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, you've shared so much advice already about your current practice and your approach to AI and to just the agency business in general. But what is a piece of advice that you would give to young designers today who want to get into the kind of stuff that you're into?
I think honestly, it's embrace change. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen every day on every project, every year or so in your career. It's just gonna happen. And the people who succeed are the ones that are recognized as a challenge, but try and get into solutions mode and don't get down on themselves too much. Because I mean, I wish I could mention some of these brands to give you more context, but I feel like it might be inappropriate. It was one we had an A-list celebrity that we were shooting with in 4 days' time, and the clients had changed the brief in a significant way. The idea that we had was just gone, but we only had 1 day to shoot with this actor, and we had 3.5 days to figure out how we're going to salvage the shoot. And we came back with an idea within 24 hours that saved the shoot. We got everything that we needed, and the results for that particular business went through the roof because of this campaign. And I think that's the mindset of like embracing change. What clients are paying for are problem solvers.
Mhm.
Anyone could get something done when everything goes like perfect. The people who are going to continue to succeed are the ones that embrace change, right? The ones that just know that this is a new way of living, a new way of working is being defined right now,
Totally.
and you could be the person that helps define it,
Totally.
And I think that's
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for
Very,
sharing
very
that.
cool. Very cool. Yes, I love it.
yeah.
I'm getting inspired myself. I'm curious, like you mentioned so many new things that you've learned and that you've embraced in terms of like change and tools and so on. I'm curious if you're special, like if you're interested in anything specific right now that could be professionally or personally, maybe a new
Mm.
habit or new type of activity or a topic.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm sorry, I think I'm going to give you like the most cliched answer possible, but I think becoming a dad is like it just completely changes your perspective on everything. I have two kids. We had two kids in a year. So
Oh, wow.
they're 361 days apart. And it's super cute
Embracing
because
change, indeed,
yeah,
embracing change.
it's super cute because 4 days every year they're the same exact age. So just to
Wow.
give you a
Wow.
sense of how close they are. Yeah. And I think, I mean, kids are a gift in a lot of different ways, and I get so much joy in watching them explore the world and like see things for the first time. Like that, those are really special moments. But I started thinking about it the other day. It's like I think the biggest sort of gift that they give you is they force you to think about things in long term, right? They expand your time horizon. This a really practical example of that is when my kids will probably graduate high school 14, 15 years from now. That puts things into perspective immediately. If we were to all think about where we were 14 or 15 years ago, and we would try and put ourselves in that mental state, what were we worrying about 14 or 15 years ago? Do we still worry about it now?
It's
Do we
such
still
a
worry
good
about it now, or is it
exercise.
done? Yeah. And that's what I think about. Like we all have stressors, we all have anxieties, but like when I start thinking with that long term lens, like it has a way of like making things feel smaller and more surmountable. And yeah, like I think that's the thing. Once I graduate high school, I'm fucked, I guess. I don't know, because then my timeline is gonna go back to day to day. But no, but all kidding aside, like they that to me is like the biggest thing. It's really freed my my way of thinking and sort of like gives me permission to think about things in the long term and not stress about the day-to-day stuff that happens in all our lives and all our careers.
Yeah. Appreciate that perspective. So, as we're rounding out our time together, we'd like to ask all of our guests for a recommendation. It could be for a book, a show, a movie, any piece of media that you'd like to recommend to your listeners or to our
Uh,
listeners and to our viewers who are watching this on YouTube.
I mean, look, I'm going to give you another cliched answer, but I think it's genius in so many ways. And everyone's going to say this. I'm sorry. Maybe it's not cool enough. I'll say it anyway. It's Severance. I think Severance is
Mm,
genius.
Hmm.
yeah,
I think it's genius. I think the thing that what really like clicked with me after a couple episodes is like if you think about like all of us in our lives and work, professional and personal careers, I would venture to say that like 90% of us had this thought, like I wish I could just turn off my personal life so I could focus on my professional life. I wish I could turn off my professional life so I could focus on my personal life. And no one really thought about like if you literally made that wish come true, what that life would be. And I just, and it's just, I love that they took like a very kind of like implausible idea and
yeah,
they just showed you how messed up that would be and how we need both parts of those lives to sort of be aware of one another to have a whole life. And that's kind of like how it comes from like a very human thought of just being able to like silo ourselves for the right moments. But if you took it literally, like I love how far they took it. And I think that's to me like I don't know. I don't hear people talking about that angle, so maybe everyone's gonna say it's the most obvious thing ever. But like for me, I was like, oh, that's super interesting. No, so I get a kick out of that.
That's awesome. I actually haven't seen the show yet, but I've heard so many great things. So I need to, yeah, renew my Apple TV
I
subscription and check
promise
that
I
out.
did not ruin anything for you.
Okay.
This is the premise of the show.
Not any
It's in the
spoilers.
ads.
Yeah.
no
No
spoilers.
spoilers.
Yeah,
No
Amazing.
spoilers. No
Okay.
spoilers. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, finally, to wrap us up, Helder, could you tell our listeners, our viewers, give them a call to action about, where they can learn more about you, your work at Unnamed? We'll post links to the show notes and to the YouTube description, but it's helpful for folks to hear it from you.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, they could just email me. Helder at unnamed.xyz. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I don't post very frequently, although I'm trying to work on that. I'm trying to get over that cringe status of posting too much on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the best thing I always love interacting with people and sort of learning where they're from and what skill sets they have and what opportunities they want to discuss. So my email address is the best way to get a hold of me. And if we get on, then you get my cell phone number and you can text me anytime.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
making yourself so available to our
Yeah, of
listeners, to our
course.
viewers, and for spending the hour with us talking about your work at Unnamed, your thoughts on working with clients and brands, and your approach towards technology, and a whole bunch of other things. So, thanks again, Helder.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
All right, and thank
thank
you
you.
for watching and listening. All right, see you at the next episode. Bye.